Hi friends, it's Jeannie and I'm back today to share these two cards using Pinkfresh Studio's Hydrangea and Roses stamp set and dies. The cool thing about this stamp set is that you can stamp out all the images in one pass and you can die cut all the images in one pass. The weird thing about this stamp set is that it is a little bit larger than a original sized Misti, which is pretty large in itself. So it kind of hangs over the Misti a little too much, so you won't get a good stamp within the Misti. So I went to the Pinkfresh Studio YouTube channel and I got a great tip on using the Misti in an unconventional way to be able to stamp this image. Because I don't have a stamp block this large, I just used the back of my Misti. I taped my Misti down using painter's tape and I lined it up with the piece of cardstock that I was going to be stamping on, and I'm essentially using the hinge on the outside. I have my cardstock taped to my glass mat to make sure that the paper doesn't move, and I am stamping with Versamark ink because I want to do some heat embossing. Once I have that stamped out, I'll remove it from the glass mat and cover it up using Hero Art's embossing powder in white. I will be doing some ink blending today because with the heat embossing, it will resist the ink and you'll be able to see the stamp image outline. Once I cover the entire cardstock piece with my embossing powder, I'm going to take my heat gun and heat set the entire card panel. I am really happy with this stamp set because you are able to create so many cards at once. Since you are stamping all at the same time and cutting all at the same time, you'll end up with a ton of images. Although I'm only showing this one card panel today, I actually stamped out two of these because I wanted to kind of create a mirror effect on my two cards. Because these stamp images are so detailed, I really didn't want to use my Copic markers to sit there and color, so I decided to do the next best thing, which is ink blending. Ink blending with a white embossing powder is so fun because that embossing powder resists and you'll be able to see the images and the images come to life as I continue to ink blend. For the roses, I went with picked raspberry, which is one of my favorite colors. And for the hydrangeas, I decided to pick wilted violet because it just goes so well with pink. And for the leaves, I will be using mowed lawn. So I'm just going in really carelessly and adding the ink. You don't have to be precise or anything like that, because you just want to focus on adding the color where you want to add it. So any leafy areas, I will add green, and sometimes the hydrangeas kind of cross over to the leaves, and that's okay. It can be as blended or precise as you want. If you want to be more precise with it, you could use a smaller brush, but I just wanted to use my ink blending tool and it worked really well. I was really happy with how this turned out. If I were to do this again, I would probably die cut first and then ink blend, and that way I won't have to do the extra step that I do after I die cut all these pieces out, which is going back in to ink blend all the edges to make sure that the entire die cut is covered in color. So you'll see that this die cut cuts everything in one pass. It is a little bit longer than my cutting plates, so I had to run it through one time, shift it, and then run it through to cut the rest of it. But it was really easy to do, and I'm so happy with all these pieces that I end up with. As you can see, I am going back in and ink blending all the edges, and I just really wanted to make the images pop, and it really helped because the ink kind of balls up at the edges, and it just makes it look more dimensional. So this is something you definitely don't have to do, but because I really wanted the flowers to stand out and the small details, I went in with a Copic marker and just kind of drew flicks in the centers of the hydrangeas and kind of around the edges of the leaves where I would normally add shadow if I were coloring it. So I know that a lot of people don't use Copic markers with their embossing powder, and I understand that it could wreck your marker tips. And I will say that I went in and was very careful while I did this. So my Copic marker tips barely touched the embossing powder outline. I was okay with that. Like, I knew the risk of doing this, but it's just something I wanted to do. So you definitely can skip it if this is not something you want to do. I really think that it adds so much more dimension to the flowers and to the images themselves, and I was really happy that I went ahead and did this. This was a little bit tedious because, of course, all the little flowers and hydrangeas have so many different details. I thought it just added to the card, and I was okay doing that. I just turned on some TV, listened to it in the background, and went ahead and did the little flicks everywhere. So once I have all these images done, I will be putting together my card. I trimmed down my white card base by 1/4 of an inch, and I matted on black cardstock, and mainly it's because I like the matted look. I also used my Misti corner to kind of help me create a 1-inch border on both my cards. So I just stuck it into the Misti, drew some lines with my pencil, and then now I'm going to go in with a micron pen to draw over those lines in black ink. I wanted a thicker border, so I added 2 lines for each of the borders, and it just made it a little bit thicker. It's up to your preference of what you want to do, but I thought that it just adds to the elegance of the card, especially because I have my white card base matted on black. This is something super easy. You just need a ruler. I love my T ruler, and I also have my like elementary school ruler that has Winnie the Pooh on it, and I just tend to interchange them as I see fit depending on how long the lines are. So here I'm just putting together my card, and I do make a small mistake with this first card because I popped up one of the larger floral bunches on foam, and I wasn't able to stamp my sentiment in my Misti because of that, because the stamp foam kind of elevates it and adds that dimension. I wasn't going to get a good stamp, so I had to pull out my acrylic block and stamp it directly onto the card base. And then for my second card, I glued all the smaller pieces down that I wasn't popping up, and then stamped the sentiment and then popped everything up on foam. I decided that I wanted to do the mirror image, and that's why I stamped this out twice. So I have double the images, and I used the exact same images on one side of the card, and then I took those same images and flipped it around on another side of the card, and it kind of just surrounds that border and adds that elegance to it. And I'm so happy with how this turned out. So I went ahead and added glue to the smaller pieces, and here I'm popping the larger floral bunch on foam, and I think that that just really helps with the card itself. It just makes it look like you're actually looking at floral bunches. So once I place that last piece on my card, I am thinking about the sentiment, and I kind of realized as I was putting down these pieces, like, how am I supposed to fit the sentiment in to my Misti? And the answer was I just couldn't. I was playing with it for a little bit, and then I decided to put the 2 smaller pieces, glue it directly on my card base, and then I was going to risk it with an acrylic block. I am so dependent on the Misti that I find it so hard to stamp directly on an acrylic block for cards because I always really like that dark look. So I like to stamp my images or my sentiments multiple times just to make it as dark as possible. Even though I'm using black ink, I'm using Gina K's Obsidian Amalgam ink, and that is really dark, but I am just so scared that I'm gonna mess up, so I am a little hesitant to do the stamp, but thankfully it worked out. If not, my backup plan was to stamp on a piece of black cardstock, heat emboss in white, and put it over my mistake, which is usually what I do if there's ever a mistake. For my A2 card, I am doing the exact same thing. I place my images where I want them to be. I glue down my 2 smaller images on the left and right hand side first, and before I pop up my main floral bunch, I will put that card into my Misti and stamp the sentiment in there because I don't want to pop up the floral and not be able to do it and then have to use the acrylic block again. After I stamp the image, it's just in the middle. I feel that everything else is kind of simple. It's just very black and white with the pops of color from the florals, and I really like how it turned out. This is such a perfect card just to keep everything very simple and no coloring, but it looks like you put a lot of effort into it. I did, spend some time with those Copic markers. In the end, it was totally worth it. So I'm super happy with how these cards turned out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time with another one. Bye!